When we left off, John Carpenter had just made Halloween, an independent film that changed horror forever. A tiny budget, a few weeks of shooting, and a story built on pure, primal fear. Against all odds, Halloween became a sensation. It made Carpenter a brand, it made him a phenomenon, and it made him a prospect for Hollywood. But success didn't open every door overnight. Carpenter was still seen by many as a horror director, a lucky outsider, and in Hollywood horror directors were seen as being slightly above pornographers.
11:55, almost midnight. Enough time for one more episode. One more episode before 12, just to keep us warm.
If he wanted to survive in Hollywood, he needed to prove himself all over again, on a bigger stage with bigger expectations. And so Carpenter's next move wasn't another horror movie, it wasn't even another independent film. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly, by mail. It was a television event about the life of a king. It was Elvis. ABC was planning a major television movie about Elvis Presley's life. Their first choice for director had fallen through and now they were looking for someone new. Carpenter loved Elvis's music, he loved the mythology of it, the good and the bad, and he said yes without hesitation.
And in that sense, I think, from my point, it's a personal film, because I really love Elvis a lot. I've always been a fan of his, and I loved his music. I have a strong feeling for him. It means something to me. I care a lot about the character. I care about his story. And in some senses, I feel lucky to be able to direct a film about Elvis. This kind of a film, which I don't feel is exploiting him, but I feel is really trying to tell his story.
It would be the biggest logistical challenge of his young career. A 3-hour film, 88 locations, 150 speaking roles, and just 30 days to shoot it all. Carpenter worked hard to avoid turning the movie into a simple love letter. He didn't just want to mythologize Presley, he wanted to capture his loneliness, the phoniness of fame, the isolation of a man surrounded by sycophants, unable to trust anyone around him. It was during Elvis that Carpenter also met the man who would become one of his greatest collaborators and friend, Kurt Russell. Russell wasn't cast because he looked exactly like Elvis, he didn't. It was something deeper, something Carpenter described as haunting, a sense of Elvis's spirit moving through him. It seemed like fate. After all, years earlier, Elvis himself had played a character called Dr. John Carpenter in Change of Habit in 1969. Now John Carpenter would bring Elvis's story back to life. When Elvis aired, it was a major success, a ratings smash. It even earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Television Motion Picture. For Carpenter, it was a crucial step, proof to Hollywood that he wasn't just a horror director. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Carpenter's personal life was changing just as rapidly. He and Adrienne Barbeau had become inseparable. They moved in together while Elvis was filming. And one night, while sitting on the couch in his beach condo in Malibu, eating a bologna sandwich, Carpenter simply turned to her and proposed. After Elvis rapped, the two were married in Bowling Green, Kentucky, despite Carpenter's complicated feelings towards his old hometown. At this point, Halloween was still quietly growing into a phenomenon, and now Elvis had given him something else: credibility, momentum, and a major collaborator in Kurt Russell. Some collaborations happened by chance, this one felt like destiny. Tough but vulnerable, cool under pressure, always awesome. His legendary professionalism was key to their bond. Even with very different personal beliefs, it never mattered on set. Respect, trust and craft always came first. Together they created some of the most iconic anti-heroes in American cinema.
Kurt's the the consummate professional, I would say, of the people that I've worked with. I've worked with some other great actors. But in terms of cinema knowledge of what the camera does, where the camera is, and what he's doing at all times, Kurt is, I think, the best.
Now, with 2 successes under his belt, John Carpenter found himself with something he never had before: real momentum. Carpenter didn't want to repeat himself, he wanted to build something slower, older, more traditional. The initial inspiration came during a visit to Stonehenge while promoting Assault on Precinct 13 in England. Carpenter was struck by the atmosphere, the heavy mist, the sensation that something ancient still lingered in the fog.
Is there always fog like this in Britain?
Oh my goodness, no. We have fog only when it isn't raining.
They struck a 2-picture deal with Avco Embassy Pictures, and with a $1 million budget, The Fog was born. Filming began in April 1979 along the rugged Northern California coastline, mostly at Point Reyes and the small town of Inverness. Carpenter loved the location so much he eventually bought a house nearby, enchanted by the endless mists and rocky shores.
I wanted to make a film about the fog as a character, as a force of evil. But I think it boils down to a horror film in the end. Horror films have traditionally been good at the box office, so that's one thing. But also I enjoy making people jump.
The shoot reunited much of the Halloween crew: Dean Cundy as cinematographer, Tommy Lee Wallace as the jack of all trades, Nancy Loomis, Jamie Lee Curtis and Charles Cyphers in supporting roles. Adrienne Barbeau, now Carpenter's partner both professionally and personally, played Stevie Wayne, the radio DJ sending warnings from her lonely lighthouse. At Barbeau's suggestion, her friend Tom Atkins also joined the cast. The supporting lineup was filled with legendary names: Hal Holbrook, Janet Leigh and John Houseman, a veteran actor whose ghost story around a campfire set the perfect opening tone, and in my opinion provided the strongest opening among all his strong openings. Rob Bottin early in his career created the ghostly makeup effects and even played Blake, the leader of the Vengeful Mariners. Bottin would return again for even greater things. Even with the great cast, the beautiful locations and the classic setup, The Fog almost fell apart. When Carpenter and Hill completed the first cut, Carpenter knew immediately it didn't work, and this time he couldn't save it with music alone. There wasn't one single thing that was wrong, but the mood wasn't strong enough, the pacing was off, the scares were too few, the atmosphere too thin. Carpenter went to Avco Embassy Pictures and told them the truth. It needed to be fixed or scrapped. It was a humbling moment. He even offered to fix it with his own money. With Avco's blessing and funding, Carpenter, Wallace and Hill launched a full rescue, cut about 25 to 30% of the original footage, shot brand new material, more scares, more tension, tightened editing, heightened the supernatural elements, and added crucial scenes like the foreboding tale aboard the trawler and Stevie Wayne's desperate climb to the lighthouse roof. Despite all the extra work, Carpenter was never fully content with what he had made. The Fog isn't just another Carpenter film to me, it's something far more personal. Once during a family trip to Lapland when I was very young, we were caught off guard by a sudden fog bank. No warning, no chance to prepare, and it moved fast, real fast. We tried to outrun it by climbing to a higher ground, but it just kept coming and engulfed us. Blinded in rough terrain, my father had to rely purely on his compass and navigation skills. And somehow, against all odds, we eventually found ourselves on an emergency airstrip, a small miracle in the vast emptiness of Lapland. I still remember the feeling of being lost and blind, the world around you just gone. I also live in an idyllic coastal town, not so different from Antonio Bay. We even have our own lighthouse. Despite the challenges, The Fog is stunning to look at. Dean Cundy's cinematography once again elevated the material. Carpenter's score, slow piano motifs and ghostly synths, was spare, chilling and invisible when it needed to be. It never shouted at the audience. The Fog isn't just about revenge, it's about guilt, about debts that never truly disappear. The founders of Antonio Bay committed a monstrous crime for wealth and survival, and the next generation, innocent or not, inherited the price. The Fog itself feels Lovecraftian, ancient, unfeeling, following rules no human mind could fully understand. There is no clemency, no understanding, no compromise, just a simple, inevitable reckoning. In terms of pure creeping horror, The Fog remains one of Carpenter's most chilling films. When the movie premiered in February 1980, the reviews were mixed. Some praised its craftsmanship and eerie atmosphere, others criticized the thin character developments and minimal exposition. And they weren't wrong. The film introduces many characters, but few are deeply explored, because the true star was never the cast, it was the atmosphere itself. Still, audiences responded. The Fog grossed over $20 million, a massive success against its $1 million budget, a third success in a row.
Father, can I get paid?
Dean Cundey wasn't just a cameraman, he was the co-architect of Carpenter's visual language. Together they built a signature style, wide anamorphic compositions, moody controlled lighting, careful movement that pulled audiences into the frame rather than just observing from a distance. Cundey had an uncanny ability to stretch small sets into epic spaces and low-budget locations into something interesting. He would also bring his own gear in a van, which made him a great asset for Carpenter's low-budget productions. Later, Cundey's career would explode into mainstream blockbusters, Back to the Future trilogy, Apollo 13, Jurassic Park. Before Carpenter's next directing gig, a short detour. After Halloween became a sleeper hit, a sequel was inevitable. Carpenter didn't want to direct it, he felt he'd said all he needed to say. But the studio had the rights, the movie was going to happen with or without him. So he and Deborah Hill agreed to write and produce Halloween 2. They brought in Rick Rosenthal to direct. Carpenter liked his student film and trusted his instincts. His only request, it has to be scary. When Carpenter saw the final cut, it wasn't. Too slow, too polite, not scary. So he stepped in, reshot scenes, trimmed the fat, added gore. In his words, I didn't believe in it, but I made it better. It wasn't a passion project, it was a financial one. After somewhat missing out on the profits of the original, Carpenter and Hill renegotiated for a real stake this time. Halloween 2 did well. Released in 1981, it made money. Another sequel was greenlit, but Carpenter wasn't interested in more Michael Myers. Instead, he and Hill pitched an anthology series, a new story every Halloween. Something fresh, something weird. For Halloween 3, they brought in Nigel Kneale, creator of Quatermass and one of Carpenter's heroes, to write the script. Kneale delivered something smart, political, and bleak, but it needed work. When Carpenter asked for changes, Kneale refused. I don't give a damn about the audience, he said. So Carpenter and Tommy Lee Wallace made the cuts themselves. Kneale was furious, removed his name from the film. Carpenter later called him a bitter old man, tired with people and the world, but he never stopped admiring his imagination. Tommy Lee Wallace stepped in to direct. The shoot was fast in spring 1982 on a $2.5 million budget. The result was Season of the Witch, a weird and wonderful sci-fi horror story about killer masks and Celtic paganism. It opened strong, then crashed when audiences realized Michael Myers wasn't in it. It still made money, around $40 million, but it was branded a failure, and the anthology experiment was over. Critics were confused, fans were angry. Carpenter moved on. Today, though, Season of the Witch has a cult following, and I, for one, am happy to partake. After The Fog, Carpenter was ready to take another leap. To fulfill his two-picture deal with Avco Embassy, he was juggling two scripts. One was The Prometheus Crisis, a disaster thriller that ultimately didn't work. The other one was Without a Trace, a time travel concept that would eventually morph into the Philadelphia Experiment. It had promise and even some striking sequences, but Carpenter didn't know how to end it. So he asked the studio, "Let me try something else." That's when he dusted off a script he'd written 7 years earlier, one no studio had wanted at the time, a strange, grim, futuristic story called Escape from New York. Carpenter had written it back in 1974 in the wake of Watergate and the rise of films like Death Wish. He imagined a future where trust in government had collapsed, where society simply had given up and walled off its criminals for good. A dystopian western, only the frontier was now a burned-out urban hellscape. To reshape the script, Carpenter brought in his old friend Nick Castle, who added dark humor and skewed satire. The film was greenlit for $7 million, a big jump from Fog's $1 million, but still modest by studio standards. Carpenter and his team stretched every dollar once again.
Good science fiction has to have an element of truth. There's something about it that you have to believe. You have to believe it's possible. I believe that it's possible that New York could become a prison. It's not that hard. Just seal it off. There you go. It's actually kind of like that now. And I think there's something that resonates for the audience when it's true. And there's got to be some truth in any film.
Only the Statue of Liberty prologue was shot in New York. The rest of the movie was filmed in St. Louis during a brutal summer heatwave. Parts of East St. Louis had been left in ruins after a massive fire in 1976, making it a perfect post-apocalyptic backdrop, while larger exterior shots were staged across the river. Production was tough. They filmed most of the movie at night from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. for over 2 months straight. Dean Cundey made this possible by securing new f1.8 Panavision lenses, which allowed them to shoot in very low light. Carpenter said he did not see daylight in over 10 weeks. Adrian told that the filming the movie exhausted him, and when he had a day off, he didn't even leave the hotel room for dinner. Despite filming during the night, the conditions were punishing. Extras collapsed from heat exhaustion, a crew member broke his arm, some shots came back slightly out of focus, but there was no time or money to redo them. Carpenter drew costume inspiration from ancient warrior cultures. The iconic duel scene with the trash can shields and baseball bats was inspired by his love of professional wrestling. And the sweeping matte paintings of New York, those came from a hungry young artist named James Cameron. For Snake Plissken, the disgraced war hero turned outlaw,
Call me Snake.
Studio executives pushed for Charles Bronson or Clint Eastwood. Carpenter said no. He didn't want a star too big to control. He wanted Kurt Russell. It was a bold choice. Russell was still known mostly for Disney comedies and had only just started breaking away from that image with Elvis. But Carpenter saw something more. He had Russell limp through the entire second half of the film to make Snake seem human after his injury. Fallible, relatable, not a superhero, a survivor.
Name's Pliskin.
Lee Van Cleef, Carpenter's childhood hero, came in to play Hawk, cold-eyed police commander. He was funnily enough named after Carpenter's former math teacher. He was great to work with despite suffering from a leg injury caused by falling from a horse. He had to redo many walking scenes because of it, but he never complained. Snake and Hawk are basically the same man, two sides of the same coin, same toughness, same code, just divided by a wall. But Escape from New York wasn't just genre fun, it had teeth. It posed a deeper question: what is freedom? Snake escapes the prison, he survives the system, he saves the president, but is he truly free? Or was Manhattan, lawless, broken, but outside the system, actually more free? When the film premiered in 1981, it was a hit. Critics were impressed, audiences loved it. It became Carpenter's fourth success in a row, grossing over $50 million worldwide. Looking back, Escape from New York is one of Carpenter's most purely enjoyable films. I'm more of a horror guy, so I naturally gravitate towards that part of Carpenter's production. But this one is just great. It's tight, it's atmospheric, the score is just great, it's strange and original, and it gave birth to one of cinema's greatest anti-heroes. And from here, Carpenter's films would grow colder, bleaker, and even more ambitious, because after Escape from New York, he would do his thing. But first we need to talk about music. John Carpenter is often called a composer, but he doesn't write music in the classical sense. He plays, he experiments, he improvises. In his own words, it's more like jazz than composing. Maybe 10% is written down, the rest just comes to him. Most of Carpenter's scores were done after the film was shot and edited, which meant that after weeks of filming and more weeks in the cutting room, he had to start all over again every day for a month or two, scoring the movie by himself or with a collaborator like Alan Howarth. He found it exhausting but necessary. Carpenter's musical instincts were shaped early. His father, Howard Carpenter, was a music professor, and their house was filled with sound: violin, bass, guitar. When asked who influenced him most as a composer, Carpenter once said, "The three big ones were Bernard Herrmann, and Bernard Herrmann, the man behind Psycho, Vertigo, Citizen Kane." What Carpenter loved in Herrmann's work was its simplicity, its directness, its ability to be frugal yet evocative. Music that didn't draw attention but did its job. He once described film music as a floor mat. You know it's there, you feel it, but it's not supposed to steal your focus. Carpenter believed music could rescue a scene. In his case, it could rescue an entire movie. But just as strongly, he believed that if a scene already worked, the music should stay the hell out of the way. He'd often fight mixers who tried to add ambient noise, telling them, "No, let it be quiet, let it be uneasy." Because silence disturbs people, and Carpenter knew exactly how to weaponize that. Most film scores evolve with the action. Take Jaws, for example, where the music goes from ominous to triumphant, depending on whether the shark is being chased or doing the chasing. But Carpenter's themes rarely radically change once they're introduced. They remain constant, steady, inevitable so much as they create atmosphere. And while Carpenter occasionally licensed songs that he loved, he always returned to his stripped-down, improvised tunes. By 1982, at the age of 33, John Carpenter had never failed. Halloween was a sensation. The Fog recovered from a rocky start to become a hit. Escape from New York was a box office smash. A rising auteur with momentum, respect and full creative control. So when The Thing came along with a bigger budget, a legendary composer and groundbreaking effects, who could have expected anything less than another triumph? But in the summer of 1982, the world was not ready. The idea had followed him for years. This wasn't just a remake of The Thing from Another World, the 1951 Howard Hawks production Carpenter loved. He knew better than to remake a movie that had nothing wrong with it. What he wanted to do instead was adapt the original source, John W. Campbell's novella Who Goes There? It was colder, more paranoid, and more aligned with the filmmaker Carpenter had become. His friend Stuart Cohen had been pitching the idea since 1975, and eventually Universal acquired the rights, both to the novella and the Hawks film, and development began.
12 men in an Antarctic station who encounter this alien form of life that can imitate other life forms perfectly, and begins to become them. And they can't tell who's who goes there. And basically it's down to, is my best friend a monster?
Carpenter declined to write the screenplay himself. He was tired, he wanted fresh perspective. So they brought in Bill Lancaster, son of Bert, best known at the time for the Bad News Bears. People scoffed, but Lancaster delivered a sharp, brutal adaptation, one that embraced ambiguity, despair, and the physical fragility of human beings. The brutality extended behind the scenes as well. Filming took place partly on a glacier near Stewart, British Columbia, and partly on sound stages in Los Angeles. The scenes were grouped by the exact weather conditions they required, sometimes forcing the crew to wait days for the right setup. Carpenter later described the shoot as a death march to the sea. The team flew in on a small aircraft, and during one trip they were nearly killed in a whiteout. On set, camera lenses froze and cracked. When brought indoors, they fogged up, and the crew had to wait for them to clear again. The local townsfolk weren't thrilled either. There were tensions, especially on weekends when the crew drank hard and flirted with the few women in town. It got rowdy, but the film got done on time and on budget. Kurt Russell returned in the lead as MacReady, another rugged loner. Russell was the only movie star in the cast, and some of the others felt the imbalance, but Carpenter kept it steady. Rob Bottin, returning from the fog, convinced Carpenter to let him handle the effects. Universal preferred a safer name. Carpenter insisted. He told Bottin only one thing: make it scary, and Bottin did, creating one of the most legendary special effects showcases in film history. The creature was never one shape, it was everything: a mimic, a mutation, a biological nightmare. The actors rarely saw it, most of the effects were added later, so they had to act terrified of nothing. When they finally saw the final cut, they were stunned. It was violent, repulsive, and on full display.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
That, combined with Cundy's fantastic cinematography and unsung heroes like John J. Lloyd and Roy Arbogast, helped to create a visual masterpiece. Even the dog, the infected husky that begins it all, delivered an unnervingly perfect performance. The score was composed by the great Ennio Morricone, a bit of an idol of Carpenter's. They met in Rome, and Carpenter was in awe. Still, Carpenter secretly added his own ambient cues, uncredited, wherever the film needed that invisible sound he couldn't find elsewhere. Morricone later said that Carpenter only used the parts that sounded like Carpenter. His response: "I did what I had to do to make it work." Carpenter pleaded with Universal to release the film in October to coincide with Halloween, but the studio had other plans and released it in June, right next to E.T. E.T. was about connection, kindness, and wonder. The Thing was about mistrust, isolation, and body horror. Audiences chose warmth. Critics were brutal. Just listen to these reviews.
The title of the remake was John Carpenter's The Thing, so it is the director who must take most of the blame for the grisly, misconceived movie. As a noxious special effects showcase, John Carpenter's The Thing was exceptional. As a movie, it was nearly a total bust. The Thing has no discernible style. The narrative seems vile, more than an excuse for various set pieces of special effects. The result is Carpenter's most unsatisfying film to date. There's a big difference between effects and suspense, and in sacrificing everything at the altar of gore, Carpenter sabotages the drama. The Thing is so single-mindedly determined to keep you awake that it almost puts you to sleep. John Carpenter's The Thing smells, and smells pretty bad. It bears plenty of Carpenter's trademarks as a director. It has no pace, sloppy continuity, zero humour, and bland characters. Carpenter's compelling story is buried beneath an avalanche of special effects. These effects are so extreme that they prevent many people from focusing on the story. It's my contention that John Carpenter was never meant to direct science fiction horror movies. Here's some things he'd be better suited to direct: traffic accidents, train wrecks, and public floggings.
Is there anything you want to say to those critics?
The critics who well, yes, I do. I just want to spend 5 minutes with each one in a room, a locked room, just the two of us. 5 minutes is all I ask, and then I'll be happy.
Carpenter was fired from Universal. No one wanted to hire him. The film tanked. Morricone's score was nominated for a Razzie, but time, as it always does, changed everything. By the 1990s, critics had come around. The film was reassessed, then reappraised, then canonized. Today, The Thing is recognized as one of the greatest horror and science fiction films ever made. And now, 43 years after it flopped on release, I sat in a movie theater watching it on the big screen. The Finnish cinema chain Finkino did the right thing and held a single showing of the 4K remaster on a Monday evening in April. There's something about waiting for it to start. In a big, silent, empty theater, it hits different. I've seen this film more times than I can count.
And did I overdress?
It's 40 years old and it still feels ahead of its time. What really gets to you isn't the creature, it's the not knowing. It's the way they start to look at each other differently.
Also, I'm boiling.
Carpenter still calls The Thing his best film, and he's right. While it's not my favorite, it is his best. It's where his obsessions, themes and style crystallized perfectly, tragically and unmistakably. It was a film about not knowing who to trust, released at a time when nobody wanted to feel that way. The industry wanted optimism. Carpenter gave them the apocalypse, and it nearly destroyed him. After The Thing flopped, John Carpenter was left adrift. He'd just made the best film of his career and the world had rejected it. He was devastated. He felt betrayed by the same people that were riding his coattails when everything was going great. He was attached to Firestarter, a Stephen King adaptation, and the script was fantastic, but the fallout from The Thing poisoned his standing with studios. And then a saving grace in the form of a phone call. It was Richard Cobritz, the producer of Elvis, who had just secured the rights to King's next novel, Christine, before it was even published. He offered Carpenter a way back in. Carpenter took the job quietly. It was the first time he'd ever taken a project he had no passion for. He didn't do interviews, no press, no hassle, no fuss. He simply showed up, did the work, and in his words, walked through the movie. Columbia Pictures gave Carpenter full creative freedom and left him alone. The shoot lasted just 5 weeks between February and April 1983. The budget, $10 million, not too shabby.
I needed a job after The Thing because nobody would hire me. So this came along and I took the job, and it turned out better than it had a right to.
The story is simple, even silly on paper. A teenage outcast named Arnie Cunningham buys a beat-up 1958 Plymouth Fury. The car is alive, it's jealous, and it kills. It sounds absurd, but it works. It works because of the sharp screenplay by Bill Phillips, which takes exactly the right things from the book and leaves the rest. It works because of Carpenter's control and because how beautifully the film is built. Dean Cundey wasn't available, so Carpenter brought back Donald M. Morgan. He's director of photography from Elvis. For me, it's one of the slickest, most visually seductive movies Carpenter ever made. Carpenter chose Keith Gordon as Arnie Cunningham, and it was the right choice. Out of all of Carpenter's protagonists, Arnie has the most defined arc. He starts as a bullied, nerdy kid and transforms into a greaser and finally into a psychopath. His transformation isn't fueled not only by trauma, it's fueled by obsession for Christine. Arnie rebuilds Christine, and Christine rebuilds Arnie. The bullies in the film are truly vile, and Christine becomes the angel of vengeance every broken kid dreams about. The rest of the cast rounds it out beautifully. Alexandra Paul, Robert Prosky, Robert Blossom, Harry Dean Stanton. The music is in my opinion among Carpenter's best, from the pulse-pounding chase theme to the almost erotic tunes of the Regeneration scene. Critics weren't sure what to make of it. Some called it shallow, Stephen King called it boring, but Siskel and Ebert both praised it. Audiences showed up, it grossed $21 million, ironically more than The Thing did. No one threw a parade, but Carpenter was back in business, and ironically, it's my favorite. Not because it's the best, not because it's the scariest, but because it's endlessly rewatchable. Alan Howarth joined Carpenter's crew during Escape from New York, originally as the sound effects guy, but when Carpenter heard him play, something clicked. Carpenter improvised a first pass, raw melody and mood. Howarth added structure and depth. The result was magic, and it truly launched Howarth's career. Together they built the sound of the 1980s. Howarth also introduced Carpenter to a synchronizer that could sync music directly to picture, replacing John's old method of composing with a stopwatch. When Carpenter moved on from the Halloween series, Howarth carried the sonic legacy, adapting and evolving the original theme across Halloween 3 and 4. Without Howarth, Carpenter's films would still look great, but they wouldn't sound the same.
The only rule is there are no rules.
After Christine, Carpenter got another shot. The modest success was enough to remind people he could still direct, and one of those people was Michael Douglas. Douglas had been developing a strange little science fiction romance at Columbia Pictures. The project had gone through multiple directors and rewrites because nobody could get it quite right. But Douglas believed in the idea, and he believed in Carpenter, and for Carpenter professionally it came at a perfect moment. And in September 1983, Adrienne Barbeau told him she was pregnant, and then Douglas called. The script was called Starman. It was everything Carpenter didn't usually do: warm, romantic, emotional, optimistic. He took it anyway, not out of love for the story, at least not at first, but because he needed a win, and somewhere along the way, something shifted.
I decided that I could probably, if I put my mind to it, do anything, and this was an opportunity to do a love story. And I got real excited about it and tried it.
Carpenter began to see Starman as a kind of an apology, a response to The Thing. If that movie was about mistrust, darkness and fear, Starman was about openness, connection and grace. He stripped away the spectacle, focused on the love story, and shaped it in the style of the two movies he adored: It Happened One Night and The Day the Earth Stood Still. An alien crash lands on Earth. To survive, it takes the form of a recently deceased man and convinces his grieving partner to help him reach a rendezvous point in Arizona. The government is after them, time is running out, and slowly they fall in love. It all comes down to Jeff Bridges, who delivers one of the most quietly astonishing performances of the decade. Bridges was nominated for an Oscar, the only performance in a Carpenter film ever to receive that honor. On the technical side, Starman was Carpenter's most expensive film to date, $23 million. Morgan returned as DP, his third time working with Carpenter after Elvis and Christine. Rob Bottin and Stan Winston returned for a few key moments of transformation. They kept it restrained, used just enough to sell the miracle, then got out of the way. Carpenter also performed some of the helicopter shots himself. He had earned a rotorcraft license just before production, having fallen in love with choppers in earlier shoots. Michael Douglas was a hands-on producer, but respectful. Carpenter said it was the best kind of producer relationship, one built on trust and shared goals, not control. Filming was smooth, no disasters, no clashes, just a good movie made well. But even as Carpenter found his footing professionally, personally everything was changing. Adrienne gave birth to their son John Howard Carpenter Jr. on May 7, 1984. He would be known as Cody. Carpenter wasn't there, he was filming. While clearly overjoyed for the birth of his son, something wasn't right. A few weeks later, he told Adrienne he wanted a divorce. Custody of their son was split, but Starman was complete. The movie premiered in December 1984. Critics loved it. Decent performance in the box office. It also gave him permission to be something more than just a horror director. He even returned to partake in interviews. It is truly a good film. It's just not my kind of film, but its importance to John's career is undeniable, because it proved that the man who gave us apocalypse after apocalypse was also capable of showing us the light, even if just once. His reputation was again solid. Hollywood was calling again. He passed on Top Gun. He passed on Fatal Attraction. But when 20th Century Fox came knocking with a strange script that had been floating around development hell for years, that caught his interest. Originally, it was set in the 1880s. Cowboys, demons, Taoist magic. A fun idea, but unworkable. It was rewritten to a modern-day martial arts fantasy set in San Francisco. And it was a genre Carpenter had adored since childhood. Kung Fu movies. He was passionate again.
There's something in it that I'm extremely proud of, and it's an essence, okay? It is Chinese mysticism and mythology presented to Western audiences with authenticity.
Big Trouble in Little China was a kung fu comedy at heart, but underneath it all, it was another urban western. The stranger rides into town, chaos erupts, and nobody gets out clean. But Big Trouble started early. Asian American activist groups accused the film of stereotyping and tried to have Carpenter removed. But the Asian cast, including Dennis Dunn, Victor Wong, and James Hong, stood by him. And the studio, on the other hand, did not like how the white guy was depicted. You can't please everyone, and he just couldn't please anyone. They wanted a standard action movie with Kurt Russell playing the square-jawed savior. Instead, they got a buffoon in a tank top shouting one-liners while everyone else saved the day. During production, Fox lost faith. Big Trouble in Little China was released in July 1986, the same summer as Aliens and The Fly. It didn't stand a chance. Some critics dismissed it as a Raiders knockoff. Audiences were confused. The movie bombed at the box office. And just like that, Carpenter was done with the studios. He had passed on really big projects and had made Big Trouble in Little China instead, the movie he actually wanted to make, a passion project for a change. Looking back, Big Trouble in Little China isn't Carpenter's best film, it's not his most personal or his most profound, but it is his most fun, fast, weird, joyful, entertaining. It was misunderstood in 1986, but it found its audience through video rentals, midnight screenings, and a growing cult following. Jack Burton wasn't the hero we thought we needed, but maybe he was the one we deserved. And from here, Carpenter would walk away from Hollywood once more. He'd go back to independent filmmaking, back to small budgets, back to basics, back to survival.
There's something about, vittu kun ei näe saatanan lasit.